Good morning. Awesome. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. We'll give it another 30 seconds for people to join, and then we'll start with an introduction, and then we'll pass it over to Jim Bianco for our keynote. All right. Thanks for joining the DeFi for Institutions event hosted by KPMG, DeFi Alliance, and The Block. My name is Imran, and I'm one of the founders of the DeFi Alliance and your host for today. DeFi Alliance is a DeFi-focused accelerator program and an industry-focused consortium. Our goal is to get to 1 billion users in DeFi by 2025. And in order for us to get there, we have 3 areas we're focusing a lot of our attention on. We are focused on regulations, acceleration, and education. And in order for us to get to 1 billion users in DeFi by 2025, we have really focused our attention on industry growth and education, along with that supporting startups. We've accelerated over 50 startups in DeFi and are now focusing our attention on educating institutions to DeFi. And a little bit about what's happening in DeFi today. DeFi has turned heads over the past 12 months with a total value locked going from 1 billion to a peak of 86 billion in lending protocols. Over 8,000% trading volume has increased in decentralized exchanges, and in a total stablecoin market cap exceeding $100 billion. I will be now introducing our first guest, Jim Bianco, who will give us some color on the macro backdrop, his insights on DeFi, followed by Q&A. So I'll pass it over to Jim.
Morning, everybody. We have a great conference scheduled. So I've got about 15 minutes here. I'm going to speak about 7 to 10-ish, take some questions. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I've got the chat open here, and I'll take a look at the chat. I want to talk a little bit about TradFi. I want to talk about the macro picture because you've got a whole day worth of DeFi, and I'll throw in a little bit of DeFi as well, too. I think the big issue right now in the TradFi world is growth of the economy. There is a concern right now that the Delta variant is going to become a problem. And what I mean by a problem is not a health problem. Well, yes, a health problem, but more an economic restriction problem. Let me give you my cynicism here. Give politicians a range of choices, and they will pick the one that they think best suits them, is what they will do. And what is the one that best suits them? Most of the politicians that ran and won in the fall, I'm talking more than just Biden, ran on the idea that the government did not do enough in 2020 when we had the pandemic, and that they wouldn't make that mistake. So if we were to see a spike in cases, yes, you can talk to me about hospitalizations and death rates and better treatments and everything, but don't expect them to go libertarian on you and say, be responsible and go about your own business. That's the concern that we've seen in the marketplace over the last couple of days or so, especially. And that is the fear that we have, is that they will put some sort of restrictions on the economy. What's most interesting is the reaction in interest rates. They have been falling as we've been having this discussion about whether or not inflation, which we have, the most inflation in the last 30 years, is transitory. So as I like to say, we have inflation, but the question is, how fast does it go away? And a lot of optimists think very soon, because it's all very temporary things like airline tickets and used car prices and things that are spiking in price because of the reopening. But then there's people like me that think it's going to be not transitory, that it's going to be more persistent. All the money printing, all the stimulus has been leading to excess demand, which is going to keep interest rates, or keep inflation elevated more around the 3% range, 3%, 4 at the very most, but not much more than that. Why not more than that? Because technology, demographics, and globalization still exist, and that should prevent us from getting to some kind of late 1970s style inflation. But nevertheless, 3%-ish inflation in a 1.2% 10-year yield is a problem. If we had a 3.5% yield on the 10-year and a 3% inflation, less of a problem. So what we're finding is the market is not so much concerned about that. It's more concerned about growth. And it's more concerned about restrictions that might be coming down the line or other things that could slow the economy. So interest rates seem to move with the reopening stocks. So if you look at the reopening stocks, like the airlines and the cruise ships and all of the other stocks that you would associate with reopening, their relative performance and interest rates move in lockstep to each other. So why we talk about inflation and why we want to know where inflation is going to go, it is definitely a story right now that the market seems to be focused more on growth and growth as we go from here. Lastly, in the last few minutes I have, and I'll take some questions on anything you have, I'll make a quick word. I'm a TradFi guy. I'm wearing my Evolution of Money t-shirt right now, but normally I would be wearing a golf shirt and a blazer. Like if you went to Miami, most of the people that were there that from the TradFi world are wearing golf shirts and blazers. They in the TradFi world, as I've said on these various formats before, a year ago, if I brought up DeFi, what was that? If I brought up cryptos, it's a bunch of bullshit. Today, everybody understands what DeFi is. They are interested in cryptos. What's holding back the TradFi world? And yeah, every day we get anecdotes. Yesterday, Elon now supposedly owns some Ethereum, and the parlor game is how much. But why aren't we seeing much more adoption? It's the fear of regulation. It is every single day. Binance is being hammered in the UK. Yellen is holding a meeting on stable coins. And that's just this week. That's what's preventing people. Remember, in the TradFi world, I invest in DeFi. The day after a story says Yellen is holding meetings on regulations, and I invest in some tokens, and they get crushed because some unexpected regulation comes down, my customers wonder where I've lost my sanity. You saw the North story. It was obvious. And then you invested and it went down. So we need some sort of clarity. We don't need total clarity in regulations. We need some clarity in regulations. And then the golf shirt blazer crowd, I think, will come much more than they're coming right now. Right now, I think what they're doing is they're waiting. They're waiting for some kind of a signal that there is some clarity. Maybe the Ripple lawsuit, maybe something from the stablecoin meeting, maybe something from somewhere other place will kind of give them that clarity. And especially given in the TradFi world, the uncertainty we have. I talked about interest rates falling and following growth, worried about the Delta variant. There's a lot of confusion in that space. Why isn't inflation mattering right now? And the reason that they give, the reason I give, is the dominance of the Fed. $120 billion a month of buying. The dominance of the ECB. They're buying 20 billion euro a month of bonds. The dominance of the BOJ and the Reserve Bank of Australia. They're doing yield curve control. They're doing unlimited amounts of buying to fix interest rates. Back of everybody's mind, we know this isn't right. And we know that this is not going to end well. Now that I've said that, not going to end well could be in 10 years. It could be next week. We don't know when. And so there is this uneasiness. So when you present an alternative like DeFi, yeah, I'm very interested in it, but can I go one day without reading stories that regulators want to try and hammer this industry? When they do, I'll be more interested in trying to invest in it. So those are kind of my prepared remarks about the bigger picture. Is there any questions that anybody has, or is there any comments that anybody wants to make? Go ahead and throw them into the chat, and I could take them from there and address them at any way that you want. So let me see here if there's any comments. How do we have a better and more honest discussion how do we have a better or more honest discussion with legislatures? Start with that. Have a better discussion with them. I would mention to you Bill Foster, Democrat from Illinois. I'm in Chicago. He's from Illinois. He's on the House Financial Services Committee. He came out last week and said that Bitcoin needs to change its programming so that transactions can be undone after the fact. It's obvious for him to say that. He doesn't understand how it works. And that he's a regulator. It's fine if my father thinks that. It's fine if your mother thinks that. But when a regulator that has some authority thinks that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. He doesn't understand how it works. And he should, because that's his job as a financial services committee member to understand it. So yes, there is a lot of explanation and understanding needs to be done. And I'll tell you right now, when you start getting into the world of no censorship, DAOs, especially DAOs, it's very hard for regulators to kind of get their head around. They're always of the opinion that there's a person in charge of everything, and we just go squeeze that person to get what we want. In this space, if you run it right, completely decentralized with a DAO, there is no person, and that's a hard thing for them to get their heads around as well too. So that's where we go. Do you think we will get a Bitcoin ETF in the next year or 2 years? Why are regulators dragging their feet in the US? Why other countries' equity markets have already had it? Yes, I do think we're going to get a Bitcoin ETF. And unfortunately, I think what they'll probably wind up doing is they'll probably wind up approving all of them at the same time. So you'll go from like 0 to like 7 of them at once. And that might wind up being a free-for-all to figure out which one is the dominant one. The reason that I think that they are dragging their feet is we have a very complicated web of regulatory structures when it comes to financial services. A lot of the SEC is afraid to approve a Bitcoin ETF when they're also talking at another point in the SEC and the OCC that a Bitcoin or Ethereum might be an unregulated security as well too. They haven't made a final determination on it. I think that that's really what's holding them back is, are we going to approve an ETF of an unregulated security? And the answer is no, we're not going to do that. But once they've defined it and they've defined that it isn't, then it gets approved. And my guess is, I think there's 9 applications now for various crypto ETFs, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum and stuff. And they'll wind up showing no bias and approve all of them. And then they'll all really roll out one right after the other as well too. Do you think stable coins can and will coexist with CBDCs in the US? Yes, I do think they can exist because I think CBDCs have a big problem on their hands. The problem with a central bank digital currency is a stable coin. It is one issued by the central bank. The problem is not the technology, it's the policy. The Federal Reserve is the regulator of the banking system. Now they're going to get into competing with the banking system. We're going to issue a central bank digital currency, a stable coin, and we're going to give you an electronic wallet to hold your money directly with the Fed. JP Morgan has every right to scream and yell, you're going to kill our deposit taking function, the basic reason we have a bank. You, the Fed, are the umpire. You stand behind the catcher. You can't also stand in the batter's box at the same time. And that's what they seem to be trying to do. And this is the struggle that the Fed is having and all of the developed countries, central banks are having with a digital currency. China's a different case. They're a completely different authoritarian government. They could just decide that the digital yuan is where they're going to go, and then they'll punish anybody like Ant Financial or WeChat Pay or Alipay that get in their way. We don't work that way. And their adoption rate, by the way, is really struggling with that too. It's very early days, but no one's excited in China about owning that, let alone their grand plan that it becomes the next reserve currency of the world. But what I think you might see, the Fed has announced that they're going to put out a position paper in September about a central bank digital currency, kind of laying out their vision of it. A lot of restrictions on it. oh, you can't have so much money in it, or you can't do this, or you're not allowed to do that. And we'll see where they're going to go, because they're going to try and preserve the banking system without trying to compete with it. The other thing that they don't want to do is they don't want to have some unlimited central bank digital currency that overtakes all the stable coins. Great, we'll just wrap FedCoin into hundreds of billions of dollars and put it into an ERC20 token, and there you go. We could then see DeFi go up 5x because we've now got a legitimate stable coin backed by the central bank. They don't want to do that either, because they don't want JP Morgan coming back going, you're killing me here. You're creating a whole new financial system without me. So that's kind of where I think their mentality is. At the end of the day, I would not be surprised if a central bank digital currency comes out with so many restrictions, it becomes a gigantic non-starter, that it winds up being a very difficult thing for adoption or for people to really find a use case. Yeah, I'd like to use it, but they put so many rules on it, I can't really use it. But we'll find out in September as well too. But as fintech startups are based on deposits, so they're taking away deposits at the source of funding for banks. That's true, fintechs are, but they're also running on the old layer one, or the old base layer of the old banking system. We still have the archaic systems of the automatic clearinghouse and SWIFT and the regulations and the rules by which the old banking system is operating under. Fintechs, I think, would probably have no problem transitioning to something in the decentralized world, because they would look at it as more efficient. They would look at it as having more capabilities and promise for them. I think the old line banking system will probably have a bit of a harder time doing it. So yes, they are trying, but you're still stuck on the old payment rails if you're a fintech firm, just trying to make the old rails run a little bit better, as opposed to let's just put together 21st century rails and let's just kind of go with that, and we could see where things are from there. Let's see. The other question I saw here, interesting that you might see CBDCs where the governance is co-regulated by the governed and by the Fed and institutional banks. I don't think you'd see that, because that's not the ethos of a central bank. They're in charge. They're in charge. They're going to run this. They're going to run it. It's not even clear that a central bank digital currency will even run on the blockchain. They might just run it as a platform on their own servers. They'll have access to everybody's transaction. We won't. That might be another type of thing that you could see. And then privacy concerns are going to definitely jump up with the Fed. Are they going to be going on endless fishing expeditions, looking through everybody's transactions to see if they violated some tax rule that they could pass on to the IRS, or that they violated some anti-money laundering rule or know your customer rule or something else along those lines? That is always going to be a concern unless they lay it out in their paper. But if they don't, and they just leave it open, that you're basically showing the government every time you move money, and you better make sure that you have every chapter and verse of the IRS tax code understood, because if you actually do it unintentionally, they'll be all over you at that point. That's going to be another problem that we're going to see. But I would be very surprised if they were to share the governance of this with banks and with the token holders, like we think in the DeFi world. Last question, so I keep you guys on. What are your views on what's going on in China? Credit growth, money supply seems to be rolling over. What are the implications globally? The Chinese economy does seem to be really struggling right now. It had a big reopening boost. The other problem we don't know about China is China keeps reporting every day that their case count on coronavirus or the Delta variant is between 5 and 20 a day. 5 and 20 cases a day in a country of 1.3 billion people that the virus originated from. No one believes that. No one knows what's going on in China as far as how bad the coronavirus cases are. We do know that in the rest of Asia, it's spiking as well too. So their economy seems to be struggling. And last thought for you, at the same time that's happening, there's been a widespread crackdown in the Chinese economy. Jack Ma, who was the richest man and owns Alibaba, started Ant Financial. He basically had Ant Financial taken away from a $150 billion company because he made comments that the Chinese government viewed as disparaging, and his ownership of Ant has been reassigned to party apparatchiks of the Chinese government. Others have been cracked down. There's the crackdown in Hong Kong as well too. I think long-term, they're doing themselves a tremendous disservice. Hooray for the US. We're showing that an authoritarian government is not necessarily the place you want to be an entrepreneur as well too, but that this is part of the bigger problems that they're having in China, least of which I mentioned before. They're really pushing hard on the digital yuan. They can't get their own people to really sign up for the digital yuan. So their answer is, here's a crappy digital currency. You don't want it? Okay, we'll take Alipay and WeChat Pay. Would you prefer more? We'll make it even crappier so that ours relatively looks better. That's never a good way to go about doing things. But that seems to be what they're trying to do there as well too. All right, I will try and end it there. Thank you for letting me start your conference. It looks like an amazing conference. Enjoy the rest of the show as well too. And I'll turn it back over to Imran.